Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Joker. So, this is a movie that, I think kind of hits people in a variety of different ways. A lot of people would just quickly write this off as an awful movie. And, to me, I would say that this movie still makes me, sad while watching the film. It is, a depressingly kind of hitting kind of film. And so, I'm not going to not say that it's a movie that, doesn't make me sad while watching it. But, because a lot of people could probably without the violence part, some people could probably relate to Arthur's story. Some people could understand where Arthur is feeling like the little man, where he's just kind of a bug to be crushed, or there's certain people that are just try to make money off of Arthur, and that's all that matters. Or there's people that is just using Arthur to a means to an end. Um, and so I think eventually Arthur is to eventually just realize how invisible he is in the world, and to be in desperation of just wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting to be whichever. But going into eventually a lot of people just going into riots or violent acts, I can't condone. I want to say that right away. Um, but I can understand maybe Arthur, um, having the system may not work. Whatever the system is for Arthur, it may not just work. And plus, also, there's a lot of people that just have to be medicated to the gills because things just don't work, um, or work out for this certain person. And so there's just well, we're gonna just try to find the perfect dose of medication and hope that this will just work for you forever. Um, and so but eventually the system just stops working for Arthur. And really, we just have people that are to eventually just not really listen to Arthur. We have Arthur, who is to supposed to go to people, and they just don't care. They obviously just don't care. If anything, Arthur is again in a system where he's just a bug to get crushed. Sadly enough, but it's true. It feels true to me that Arthur is just being, uh, he's in a world where the weirdest thing is we have some guy who's just rattling off all this information about a person's file right in front of this guy, and I'm isn't this confidential stuff that this guy is just rattling off? This just seems kind of weird to me, but that's the world that Arthur is to live in. And so there's the world that Arthur is to live in is just kind of just bizarre. Is it's just yeah, wild world. But yeah, so going into this movie, some people have a variety of emotions about this film. Some people hate it. Some people like it because of whatever reason. Um, I would just say that I'm just in the middle of the road of this movie. I don't think I'm ever gonna fully enjoy this film, because why? Because it makes me sad every time I watch it. Uh, and so yeah, so when I get to spoilers, I'm gonna be talking about certain dark, disturbing, whatever things going on in this film, and so I'll probably cover most of this movie. So if there's some kind of subject matter that eventually happens in this movie, I apologize from talking about it in spoiler terms. But I'm to talk about this film. So teeing it up for people, what is to really happen in this film, in cryptic sense. So we have a man named Arthur who is to be eventually put through, like therapy, and eventually he is to go and be this clown who is to eventually do these like odd freelance jobs that eventually is to like hold up signs and like just oddball jobs of work where like he's to eventually go and like perform at this hospital. And so Arthur is to eventually like try and do stand up, and like bizarrely we have Arthur that is mentioning that like his stand up is like club ready, and his mother is just like, okay, that like that doesn't sound right. And so Arthur is to go into a club and do his piece. And eventually, it seems that there is a show named Murray Franklin that ends up catching this, and is to kind of make fun of Arthur for what he perceives as funny, or what he is to just provide on the show. And so that all of a sudden is to lead to then Arthur almost thinking that, oh my god, like I've made it, like I finally like have like someone see me. And Arthur is to all of a sudden think that his life is just going really well for him. Like Joker or Arthur is to meet a woman in an elevator, and all of a sudden it seems that this relationship is to be going well. He's going on a date supposedly, and he thinks that like everything is just coming up aces for him. That all of a sudden everything is finally working out, where he can just finally just have fun. But then he realizes that all that fun was just a fabrication, and that really he has decided to turn his life into a comedy, because really um, like turning that frown upside down kind of thing, and like saying that like his life has always been a tragedy, but maybe it was just a comedy all along and he didn't realize it until now. So with that said, let's get into this movie. Let's talk about spoilers. uh yeah, I severely talked about that in a very cryptic like sense, even the teeing up of this movie. But like eventually we'll get to eventually see certain parts of the Wayne family in this movie, the Bruce Wayne family. We'll also eventually start to see like Arthur with his mother, because Arthur lives with his mother. Some kind of comic books that you've probably seen of Arthur. Um, like there's some spots that drastically differ from this story, and so if you've kind of like followed any kind of other like Joker origin stories, this might be slightly different. So with that said, let's go into just spoilers of this movie. So like yeah, like I didn't do a proper an all good and well just like teeing up this film, but like it's the Joker movie. I think a lot of people have either seen this movie, or like they haven't seen this movie and never want to. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we can do spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of this film, we have Joker who is to do his like is to go to his job and put on his makeup and go on to eventually have this like wig that has this like clown like hair. So uh, Arthur is to go into this locker room and kind of like prep his costume for going out and holding out this sign, and he's flinging it around, and he's like, yeah, like I'm all happy and all great. And so all of a sudden we have a bunch of kids who go and steal Arthur's sign and start running off, and so now Arthur has to forcibly run after this sign. And so what ends up happening is the kids end up going and smacking Arthur with his sign, and he ends up falling over, and then they start beating him up. And so that leads to eventually Arthur going like transitioning to his therapist sessions. it seems like Arthur has probably had this therapist for a very long time, who knows how long, but it's not like something that just recently happened. So Joker, Arthur is giving uh, his therapist his notebook, kind of a things that he has written down and mentioned and whatever. And so it seems this girl reads one passage of like, I hope my I hope my death is as a joke as my life, or something like that, something around that kind of way. So uh, eventually, like eventually, we just consistently have this therapist who has no never mind about what this passage was to read. So all of a sudden, like the therapist just asks Arthur, it's like, well, how's your job? How's your day? How's your whatever? Like, have you had any darkened thoughts or whichever? So, uh, Arthur is to ask this therapist, it's like, well, hey, like, is there any new medications that I could be on to, like, eventually make me feel better? Like, I don't feel quite all that better. And so the therapist is like, well, you're on several medications already. And so I think that should just do you. And so, like, Arthur is just like, I don't think so. Like, like, if like it's not like, but this therapist is just like, hey, like this session is over, like get out of here. So Arthur is to eventually go onto a bus and like just kind of like make goofy faces to a kid. All of a sudden we have a mother who's like, hey, stop messing with my kid. And Arthur's like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, so I guess Arthur has these like compulsive laughing kind of things and or uncontrollable laughter. So eventually he's to give this woman a note mentioning that he has uncontrollable laughter, I guess, in like certain stress situations or just whatever, and it's not meant to uh be like funny to this, but he just can't control it. So uh Arthur is to eventually go home to his mother, who is Penny Fleck. And so both Arthur and Penny are both going to watch the Murray Franklin show. And so, like, Penny Fleck is to mention that she used to work with Thomas Wayne. And so, like, uh, in mentioning about like letters that she had given to Thomas and whatever, kind of mentioning about like how they're not living all that well, and it's just like, well, like that's just like there's nothing they could do. So uh Arthur is to eventually watch the Murray Franklin show, and like there was a news bulletin before talking about these super rats, and so Murray Franklin decides that he's going to mention also about the super rats and how like eventually they're going to counter this whole thing by putting out super cats. And so uh and so all of a sudden we have this like one person in Murray's crowd that all of a sudden is to be laughing harder than everyone else is, and all of a sudden this one person is to mention that I love you, Murray, and he's like, oh, I love you too. It's like, who was that out in the crowd? And so all of a sudden we see Arthur Fleck, who is in the crowd. All of a sudden he stands up and he's just kind of mentioning how like he is like he's an only child, and Murray's just like, well, yeah, like so is I, like I can understand like where you're coming from, because my father is one of those where like he went out for a pack of smokes and he never came back. So like Arthur is just kind of mentioning how like he's taking care of his mother and like all this stuff, and that everybody should be just like, like, ooh, look at this guy. And so like Arthur is imagining all of this, that everybody is just kind of falling in love with Arthur from all the stuff that he's talking about on the show. And so the very next day, Arthur is to go into work, and we just have a guy named Randall who is deciding to like tell Arthur that he should probably protect himself. And hey, here's this paper bag with a gun in it and some bullets. And so Arthur is like, you know that we shouldn't have guns on us. And Randall's like, well, hey man, like just pay me later and like just kind of just hey man, keep this to yourself, like protect yourself out there. So so if anything, Randall is to or Randall, uh, like Arthur is to go up to his boss, and like his boss is griping about the previous job that Arthur had done, and supposedly that this music store has been missing a sign that Arthur had. It's like, well, Arthur mentioned is like, well, hey, like I had gotten jumped at this place, and like all they care about is some missing sign, and like we have like Arthur's boss that is just kind of mentioning all like the problems that he's having with Arthur, how some of the people, some of his coworkers call him creepy or something like that, and Arthur is just blocking all of this out. He's just smiling, just going mm-hmm, as basically this like boss is just kind of chewing him out. And so that eventually leads Arthur to finish up with his day of work and making it back home to eventually bump into a girl named Sophie Dumont, who they're in the elevator together. And so Sophie is to eventually mention how horrible living conditions they have here, how eventually she's all of a sudden taking a gun to her head and like pulling the trigger. And so eventually Arthur is to like do the same thing in kind, but kind of doing a much more like performance act of it all. And like that is to be supposedly the first like time that these two are going to have met with one another. So Arthur goes on to then bathe his mother, and I'm just like, okay, like I guess like this mother really needs some real true maintenance. And so Arthur is talking about his comedy, how it feels like very club ready, and like everybody's just touting about how great Arthur's comedy is, and Penny Fleck, who is Arthur's mother, is just like, you do realize that like in order for you to be a comedian, you have to be funny, right? And like Arthur is just like, yeah, like I'm doing it, like I like it's gonna happen, like people are gonna love me. So, uh, we have Arthur who, like, in one day just kind of follows Sophie around to see where Sophie goes with her daughter and just, like, continues to just follow her around for, I guess, one of his days off of work. So, Arthur is to go on to, like, see a stand up comedian who's talking about this, like, role play that he does with his wife and mentions about some, like, school teacher ish like act, and so like Arthur is taking notes about this. So uh, Sophie is to eventually go and confront Arthur at his home, mentioning it's like, well, hey, like you were following me all of today, weren't you? And Arthur is like, well, yeah, I did. Like so. Sophie was mentioning, hey, maybe you can come in and rob the place. And Arthur is just like, well, yeah, I have a gun on me. Maybe I'll go and just, like, I'm just like, what is this? Uh, so Arthur is to eventually go and dance for this hospital. And all of a sudden we have a gun that is to slip out of Arthur's pants because I guess he had a hole in his pocket or whatever. So we have his boss who ends up calling him via this like telephone booth, and so Arthur sadly gets fired during this phone call because like Arthur is to mention that the gun is just part of his act, and his boss is just saying that he's lying, and how like Randall had mentioned that like Arthur was trying to buy a gun off of him some other day, so which actually wasn't the truth. Randall just gave Arthur the gun. But so that transitions us to eventually Arthur just wanting to just go home and just like trying to sit in a subway, and all of a sudden we have these three Wall Street guys that all of a sudden are to start heckling a girl or start messing with her, and all of a sudden out of uncomfortableness, like we just have Arthur who just starts laughing. And so all of a sudden we have a guy who is singing a song called Send in the Clowns, and like the closer and closer these guys get, the more that they're playing with Arthur. One takes the wig off that Arthur's to have and place it on his own head, and so eventually we just get it to where these Wall Street guys are just going and just starting to like grab Arthur and just start to like beat him up. And so that's when finally Arthur has just had enough and of people just beating him up. Like we have a scene where Arthur is just beating the crap out of trash, like just beating the crap out of a dumpster just because he's just like tired of the way that the world is. And so all of a sudden we have Arthur who grabs out a gun and starts shooting these men, and eventually there's one guy that ends up getting away. And so eventually once this one guy is to like eventually have this subway door open, like Arthur is just kind of like poking his head out of this subway door to see where this guy heads. And so this guy ends up trying to leave this subway, and so Arthur is chasing after him and eventually shoots him on the stairway, and eventually just runs off after like he like emptied out his entire gun into all of these men. So Arthur is to run off, and what eventually happens is Arthur is to supposedly run off to go to Sophie's apartment and kiss her. And Arthur, the very next day, is to go to his job, collect everything from his locker. We have certain guys that are kind of ragging on him, giving him crap, mentioning it's like, oh, are you putting a gun in your act? Wow, that's great. Like certain guys like Gary are trying to be nice. Like Randall is just being Randall. So, uh, we have we have Arthur that kind of accuses Randall of something, but then eventually he just goes on to punch the punch out clock, and then eventually goes and adjusts this sign to say "Don't smile," and then he leaves. So, Arthur is to go on to see his therapist yet again, and so eventually we just come into this session where Arthur is to tell this therapist, like, you know what, you're really not doing your job. Like, if anything, you're just telling me these generic questions and you're asking me about if I ever have dark thoughts. Like, all I have are dark thoughts. And, like, what are you doing to help me with that? Like, what medication are you going to give me to help me, to make me feel better? And we have this therapist who's just like, well, the city is to cut funding, and so actually this session is going to be our last. So Arthur is like, well, where am I going to get my medication from? And this therapist is just like, never. like we have Arthur, who I guess is just going to be a person that's going to slip through the cracks, and no one is going to be able to find help for him. Or he's not going to be referred to anybody, especially in this state. So, sucks to be him kind of thing. So, uh, Arthur goes on and does stand up. And so he does stand up, and like Sophie is supposedly there, and so Arthur is to like struggle to do his stand up, and like he starts laughing, and like he starts going through this routine, and how he mentions that like he wasn't going to get a real job because he was going to be a comedian, and how his mother was saying that he'll probably like not make it or whatever. So but yeah, everyone just starts laughing. Everybody's just starts loving this stand up. Everybody supposedly starts loving what Arthur is doing. And uh so both Arthur and Sophie are to go out into the night and just kind of just like be with one another. And so all of a sudden we have like a newspaper report, like a newspaper mentioning about like the clown killing, how supposedly this is someone with a mask, not actually with makeup on. And so we have Sophie mentioning that supposedly like the Joker is a hero, and that there's three horrible people from out of the world and whatever. And so like like I guess if like there's a ways to see this. So uh so eventually Arthur is to go home to eventually go and dance with Penny. And like his mother is mentioning about his cologne, and it's like, well, yeah, I went out for a date. Like I had a really good night. So, what eventually happens is Arthur is to eventually have to like go and mail, uh, letters that Penny is still sending to Thomas Wayne. And so eventually Arthur decides that he's going to read these letters to Thomas Wayne, where it is to consistently mention about your son. Like me and your son, like are doing this, and like life can, or like conditions in this home isn't exactly good, and like your son like is like it kind of feels like he's happy, kind of sad though, and blah blah blah. Uh so Arthur tries to confront his mother about like these letters, and eventually she won't discuss this with him, just because he's angry or upset about these letters. It's like, well, yeah, like why wouldn't he be? Like he's eventually just reading letters like that his mother sent, just because he wants to know why she sends these letters to Thomas Wayne so often, and because she won't talk. So Arthur goes to see like Bruce Wayne, who just so happens to be at the gate of Wayne Manor. So Arthur is to go and do tricks for Bruce, and eventually, I'm assuming that Alfred is to eventually just kind of come into the fray and like see why Arthur is like here or whatever. And so eventually, it just gets where Arthur eventually chokes Alfred, just because like Alfred is kind of talking poorly about his mother, and so eventually that just leads to eventually Alfred getting choked by Arthur, just because uh we have Arthur who's making accusations that eventually his mother and Thomas had like kind of given Arthur like life, so to speak. So, uh, anyways, we transition to eventually having Arthur going home, and all of a sudden we see Penny, who is to eventually be in an ambulance, needing to go to the hospital because evidently she's in poor health. Because supposedly there has been two detectives that went to Arthur's home to question about the shootings, and that led to Penny getting in poor health and kind of just unsure about all this. So, uh, if anything, we eventually have the detectives hearing about Arthur's laughing condition. And so they just ask, like, Arthur, it's like, you know what, is the joking thing real, or is that just part of your act? Is this just like you just like trying to like do something, and Arthur is just like, no, like I have a condition. Like as if these people are just trying to twist and whatever, that it's just like this guy, there's just something wrong with him, or like there's just something goofy about this guy that we have to further on see. So we consistently have these detectives that keep going and keep looking into Arthur, but also they're looking into a number of other people that are to be clowns that work with these people. So uh evidently Sophie is to supposedly be with Arthur uh, at this hospital visit, and so Murray Arthur is to watch on of this Murray show, and evidently they're talking. There is also to be like a clown protest, and and we see Arthur, who eventually is to be sleeping, and next to him, he's to have a newspaper that reads, um, "Kill the Rich is the new movement," and it has like a clown in front of it. So, uh, we transition to have Arthur sneaking into this one theater as an usher to go to the bathroom to talk to Thomas Wayne. And so, uh, Thomas is to mention that Penny was to be mentally ill, and that supposedly Arthur had been adopted, and like any number of things that would forcibly have like Thomas Wayne kind of being an a-hole, uh, but I guess like technically with Alfred maybe possibly telling like Thomas about what had happened, maybe like Thomas doesn't need to be all that nice, and plus also like you can remember like Thomas probably did have some ties to the mob, and so maybe the whole fact of Thomas acting the way he is to also just be the fact that like he was mob connected maybe. Uh so Arthur just decides to empty out his refrigerator and just stand in his refrigerator for I don't know who knows how long. And so all of a sudden we have the Murray Franklin show like deciding to call Arthur, like mentioning how it seems that people were very responsive to Arthur's stand-up moment, and so like they desperately wanted Arthur to come back on the show. Like I don't know why, I guess to like make fun of him more or what. Like I don't know. So uh Arthur has decided to go to the like the Arkham Mental Hospital to go and check on Penny's records. And so what ends up happening is we end up having this guy who ends up just like opening up Penny's records, because evidently like it took him a while because it was like 30 some odd years ago. So this guy just opens up this records and starts reading, oh yeah, like this woman had problems with this and this. I'm like, who just starts like babbling and reading that just out in the open? Like this seems freaking rude. Um, but so eventually like Arthur just like, because this guy won't sign off to give this guy these records, like Joker just grabs them and takes off with them. So so Arthur just starts reading the records and finds out that yeah, he was adopted, and that eventually like it seems that Penny was abused and Joe and Arthur was abused, and so like I guess like Arthur might have been abused so badly that eventually he like had lost all memory at a certain portion of his life, to not remember things like him being adopted or whatever. Um, but I guess also you could see or you could tell that kind of Penny was really just frazzled also during that moment. So eventually we just have a moment where Arthur is to eventually go to Sophie's apartment, and like Sophie is to confront Arthur and just be like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Like you're probably in the wrong room. Like, she's saying this nicely, but she could also call the cops on Arthur. And so Arthur is starting to realize that Sophie was never actually there whatsoever. Like, she was never trying to like have advancements upon this guy. Like, she was never like kissing him. They were never having a relationship together. Arthur never went to her apartment for anything. And so, like, you have this assumption that maybe Arthur did possibly kill Sophie, but there's never, like, people could have that consensus, but then also, like, you could probably say that he probably just left the room. Like, there's this back and forth about it. And so, uh, what eventually ends up happening is Arthur goes back to the hospital where he's talking to his mother, and that is when eventually he like talks about his life being like a supposedly comedy in disguise of a tragedy. And so eventually after that, Arthur does smother his mother with a pillow in the hospital, sadly enough. And so uh, Arthur is to go back home to eventually be uh, like surprised by both Randall and Gary. And so both Randall and Gary are to comfort Arthur because they heard that his supposing mother had died. And so Arthur is to say that he's celebrating by dyeing his hair green and like taking a shower and kind of just cleaning himself up and whatever. So what ends up happening is really just Randall is actually there. I'm going to have to pause here for a minute to do a little bit of a reset. All right. So at first it seems like Randall is to be there to supposedly comfort Arthur, but that's like we can eventually see the wheels are turning. And so Randall is start asking what Arthur knows about the whole shooting incident and how it seems that the detectives are kind of coming around just trying to see who had shot these men, and it seems like Randall is asking like really what Arthur knows or anything like that. And so you can start to see how like Arthur already had some scissors in his back pocket. And so all of a sudden, once Arthur is to start going to this line of questioning, we just see Arthur who just takes out these scissors and starts just going to town on Randall with these scissors, just murdering and bashing this guy's head into a wall. So Gary is in this corner just kind of just protecting himself. And so Arthur is to mention to Gary that he's going to go on the Murray show because eventually he's been called for that. So Gary is to eventually like get the okay for him to leave because like Arthur is to mention like, hey, like go ahead and leave, like I'll let you leave. So Gary is to sadly enough not be able to reach a lock of this door, and so he asks for Arthur to help him like get out of the room or get out of the apartment. So Arthur unlocks one of it and then just kind of like plays with the door, but then eventually lets Gary out as Gary like runs freaking out of there as quickly as he can. So that is when we get the most iconic scene of this entire movie where we have Joker going on and being like full on Joker, makeup and everything, and he's dancing down this stairwell. And we have also that dancing moment in the subway, and I think a lot of people can have a million different things of what the whole dancing thing is. Like a lot of people immediately say, like, oh yeah, like we both know what the dancing thing is. Like you don't have to tell us what the dancing thing is. Like really a lot of times we can just kind of see like in other kind of movies that Joker at some point has danced. Like we can kind of see in the '89 film, or like the Joker like kind of dances while he is to destroy art in the '89 film. We are to see moments where, um, like in certain kind of things, like he's to grab people and dance with them. And so we kind of have seen this pattern of eventually Joker dancing. Like maybe he is to imagine that he is to hear applause, um, about him doing these things. And maybe that is the reason why he dances during this whole time, because he is to imagine that everybody is triumphantly, uh, like cheering him on, and what could he not do but dance during this whole period. There could be a number of different ways you can break down the dancing, but I'm not going to just hugely take hours and hours and speculate what the dancing could be. But people have their own perspectives about it, and I can completely understand anybody having a comment about it, or like thinking what they think about this Joker film, or just the dancing itself. So, uh, all of a sudden Joker is dancing down this thing, to this kind of like old fashioned like football kind of music, and which I mostly know from like football dancing music. And so all of a sudden we have these two detectives at the very top of this stairwell, who is to all of a sudden, hey, like, hey Arthur, like we called you once before and we want to know information more about this shooting. And so we have Arthur that is just running off into the subway. These two detectives are on chase. We all of a sudden coincidentally have an entire subway full of clowns or jokers or whatever, like how you want to say this, people in masks or makeup. And so what eventually happens in the subway is the Joker continues to go in further, away from these detectives, and all of a sudden we have these detectives who are to toss out their guns and just be like, hey, like police. And so eventually one of the clowns eventually go and grab, this gun from one of the detectives and quite possibly shoot one of these clowns, which starts like basically people punching and fighting and grabbing these detectives. And it eventually leads to having, uh, Arthur having a clown mask over his already makeup. And so eventually Joker is to easily make an escape by putting off this, mask and just going off to the Murray show. Like we can kind of start to see in some parts of this movie where the Joker makeup isn't always consistent. We could start to see a lot of times that, a lot of the makeup is actually uneven, to where it's just like, okay, so maybe that was their hesitation of consistently going into the Joker makeup because they probably couldn't get it consistently correct. So they probably tried to avoid doing the Joker makeup as often as possible, just because like they would probably get inconsistent kind of matchups, and a lot of people would just like complain about the makeup the whole movie. So because like obviously once we actually get, like the Joker makeup in like the Murray Franklin spot, like it feels just very uneven. But I get how like he just had a mask on and took it off, and so the makeup could still be uneven. But like even when they probably correct it in the show, like kind of with makeup and whatever, like it still just kind of feels uneven. But anyways, so uh now we get where, Murray, or where Arthur is on the Murray show. He's kind of in his own little room, fixing up his makeup. And so we end up having like, Mr. Franklin, as he's too forcibly dressed by his protege. Eventually, we have like, Murray, who's like, okay, you're wearing clown makeup. What is with this? Or like, are you with the protest that's going on? And and Arthur is just like, no, like if anything, I'm not like with them, like. But he did like relish in it when he eventually went to be an usher. Like he kind of watched as this whole protest, and he's like, yeah, like hey, like all right, like because like Joker might or Arthur might feel like he started all of this. But anyways, so Murray is just okay, whatever Arthur is to want. Arthur is to mention that um, that eventually Murray had called Arthur the Joker, and so Arthur wants him to be called the Joker, and so I guess we'll call him the Joker for the rest of this movie. So, uh, eventually, Joker is to go and be like behind this curtain. And at one point in this movie, we have Arthur, who obviously like practiced going on the show, and eventually practiced like what he was to say and everything like that, even practicing his knock knock joke. So, uh, eventually, Arthur is to eventually go and uh, like he is supposedly supposed to follow this doctor or this therapist or whichever. So Arthur is to like start dancing before he is to go into the actual uh like uh like out in the actual show set piece. So Arthur eventually goes out there and immediately goes and kisses the doctor, and we have Murray who's like, wow, like you put out a really interesting entrance. And so uh we had we really had just Joker sitting down, and so eventually what ends up kind of playing out here is Joker goes and does this joke that is to be like kind of in bad taste, and so all of a sudden we have people starting to turn against Joker because we have Murray who's supposed to be like the comedic act against Arthur, and so we eventually Arthur, who confesses about the three Wall Street men and how he had killed them, and Murray just kind of takes offense to this and just like, so you're confessing that you were actually the one who did that and you caused this whole like rioting and protests and everything. And so Arthur's defense is like, well, if I were to have died, like no one would have cared. Like everyone would have just stepped over me like a bug, and like, but like you have um these three Wall Street men that all of a sudden they matter because they made money. Like like they kind of start to compare it to like Thomas Wayne, how like basically a man with money, like that's the only thing that really matters. That Thomas Wayne is a symbol for Gotham because he's the person that can afford to like basically feed the needy and whatever, and like and be this like this technically good person, but a lot of people might not know what Thomas Wayne has done behind closed doors kind of thing. Like there's a whole side of Thomas Wayne that a lot of people don't know about. There's a lot of several different stories that Thomas Wayne has been in where like he is actually a part of the mob or part of the Falcone family, and he has also like helped this family like basically like keep murderers alive and keep them on the street. So kind of like Thomas Wayne is kind of a hypocrite in all honesty, where like he is to mention about bad people when he has been also the one that has probably kept bad people alive. Like look at like the Long Halloween where Thomas Wayne um, had tried to like keep Carmine Falcone alive. Carmine Falcone, who has probably killed who knows how many people in this Gotham world. Uh, but yeah, so but that's my whole like rant about like Thomas Wayne and how like uh really there are some people in this life that are meant to just be crushed like a bug because nobody knows the difference. Like some people are just there to be honestly used, and that's to be just depressing and sad. But anyways, so we eventually have Arthur or Joker, who eventually is to put out one more joke, and what ends up happening is, of course, Arthur or Joker is to go and shoot Murray because of the times of which that Murray before had been really harsh on Arthur and kind of tried to make a joke of Arthur in the past. And so, really, the only joke left to do is to sadly kill Murray after the times of which that uh, Arthur had just felt ashamed of like being himself because Murray is making a joke out of his existence. So, uh, that eventually is to have Murray be shot, and so Joker is to get up close to the camera and say one last thing, and all of a sudden he gets cut off. All of a sudden, there's a bunch of people, there's a bunch of news covering this whole thing, and so what ends up happening is Joker is to be arrested and be hauled away via this police car, and so all of a sudden we just see rioting in Gotham, and so what ends up eventually happening is an ambulance crashes into this police car. We see here that like jokers or just clowns, clowns are like in this ambulance crashing into this police car. And so what eventually happens is Joker ends up getting kind of carried out. Because like they see him as like their symbol or as their like it's kind of interesting when we like go to Joker as this symbol because when looking at it like in Batman Begins uh like Bruce Wayne talks about like the Batman symbol or the bat symbol as like his symbol like and that Batman could be a symbol for Gotham to like don't have to like fall for the criminals and corrupt. So uh eventually we end up seeing during this rioting that one of these clowns go and shoot both Thomas Wayne and Martha Wayne in front of Bruce Wayne. Mentioning the clown mentions that Thomas Wayne is going to get what he deserves, which I don't know exactly what that means. That like I guess if you're like the rich that you're greedy or I don't know what that means. Like I don't know what exactly like these clowns could like say that that Thomas Wayne is getting what he deserves. I guess technically what I just mentioned about like Thomas Wayne kind of technically being tied to the Falcone family, I guess that could be like, oh well, like his like Thomas Wayne's hands are technically dirty, and I guess like that could be a justification uh for eventually Thomas Wayne's death. But again, like it's slippery slopes. So eventually we just see Joker who is to be hospitalized, and eventually it seems that he is in yet another therapy session where it just seems that like this session is just kind of going nowhere. We all of a sudden have Arthur who is to mention about a joke that he heard, and this therapist is like, well, what's the joke? And Arthur's like, you probably wouldn't get it. So we're to see like Bruce Wayne just like standing like where he was standing before, like just at the feet of him is his parents who are dead. And so we are to naturally assume that Joker had killed his therapist off screen, and that eventually he's just walking away from this therapist session with blood covered boots, meaning that he had killed someone, and that he is going to dance his way out of this Arkham hospital without anybody noticing or realizing or caring that the Joker is just going to escape this prison. Because I guess anybody can escape Arkham Mental Hospital or the prison or whichever. Like we had at one point where Joker, like during his talks with Murray, we had Murray who was to mention it's like, well, so are you saying that you're just insane? Like, is that your plea? Is that like the reason why you would kill these men just because you're insane? Like, that just seems like a cop out. Like that you like just want to easily just kind of just mention that you're insane, so that way like people take pity on you or something like that. And so yeah, like I guess like when a system does not help a guy that obviously needs help, then like eventually where can the guy go? What can the guy do? Um, and so like again, that doesn't justify the violence of any part of this movie. That doesn't justify the writing. That justifies nothing of sorts or whatever. But like violent acts or whatever. But like I want to say that as clearly crystal as whatever. Like I hope nobody construes what I said or any part of this to uh like there are alternatives. So with that said, I'm gonna alternatively get out of here. However you guys felt about this review, let me know in the comments below. I can understand a lot of people having a different kind of spectrums, or any way of words that I probably said had made people just kind of like, whatever. So I don't know. Like, comment down below. But anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.